I hate introducing myself. Why don't I just talk? The festival Composing the Island is probably the largest retrospective of Irish concert music that has ever been held in this country. It's taking place across the way in the National Concert Hall, even as we speak. The book, The Invisible Art, which has been edited by Michael Dervin, is a large-scale coverage of Irish music of the past 100 years. I was asked to write the chapter of this book dealing with the period of the 1950s and 60s. The composers working in Ireland at this time are an extraordinarily varied group. You have composers who really their language is formed in the pre-war years, and a lot of them were working well after the Second World War, but they are essentially people who grew up while Ireland, for example, was still part of Great Britain and the United Kingdom. I'm thinking of people like Frederick May, Brian Boydell, composers like that, Archie Potter. Now you then have a younger generation who are coming into focus in the 50s and 60s for the first time. These include John Kinsella, Saoirse Bodley, and Sean O'Riada. I think that the work within my area that has been the revelation of this festival and of researching my chapter for the book is the Sinfonia de Profundis by Archie Potter. Potter, oddly enough, is another Northern Irish composer. He was born in Belfast, studied with Vaughan Williams at the Royal College in London, and settled in Dublin. It's no secret, I mean, you can read it on the Wikipedia article on Archie Potter, that he did have a battle with alcohol, as did John O'Riada. And when he describes this piece, which was premiered in Dublin in 1969 as Out of the Depths, De Profundis, this is literally what he meant, I believe. He was going through a terrible crisis in his life at the time. This comes across in the piece. The piece is very difficult to describe. I can tell you it's a symphony. I can tell you it's in 5 movements. I can tell you it lasts about half an hour. But beyond that, it's an extraordinarily mixed, hyperactive, hyper-energetic kind of music that in some of its extreme moments, of which it has many, would remind me of Charles Ives. I think in the book chapter I described Archie Potter as the Irish Charles Ives. This work was done at the festival last Wednesday night by the RTE Concert Orchestra. It received a standing ovation, as indeed it did at its Dublin premiere in 1969. It's certainly one of the most remarkable modern works by an Irish composer. It has been recorded by the National Symphony Orchestra, I believe on the Marco Polo label, and I would recommend people to listen to it. I don't believe that Archie Potter's music is known very much outside of Ireland. Again, he's one of these interesting kind of Northern Protestant figures who spent a lot of his time engaged with Irish folk music, arranging it, orchestrating it, because he was part of that generation, whether you were Church of Ireland or Catholic or whatever, where you felt Ireland has to have its own voice. Alois Fleischmann belonged to this school as well, and Alois Fleischmann's background is German, but a lot of his works incorporate Irish tunes and so forth, because there was this feeling coming on the tail end of people like Bartok and Vaughan Williams. If they can do an art music that sounds Hungarian or English, well, we should do one that sounds Irish. Now, this is kind of the nub of the matter. Sooner or later on this island, we always come back to this question. What is an Irish composer supposed to be doing? I mean, it sounds like a very general question, but it's one that presses on all of us.
Like, should he or she be thinking insularly, or should he or she be thinking as like a composer of the world?
Yes. Well, you see, that's a good way of putting it. Think of it as an Irish composer, or think of yourself as a world composer. Those seem to be the two alternatives. Now, for my generation of composers coming into our own around the 1980s, shall we say, 80s and 90s, the matter was dead and settled. We thought you have to be an internationalist. I mean, arranging jigs and reels, excuse me, I mean, we don't do that anymore. But on the other hand, when you go abroad, you find out that people persist in regarding you as Irish. And the first question they want to know is, what makes your music different from other people's? Yeah.
So you have to go back to arranging jigs and reels.
Well, you see, it's probably not as simple as that. This is the question that people like Bodley were trying to address, because he was saying I can be an Irish composer who is an internationalist. But whichever way you cut this cake, it's not easy. The path is not easy. Let's go the purely internationalist route. The problem then is we can do all that, and we've had lots of composers who do it very well. But how highly do we score? In more than one sense of the word score when we do that kind of thing. I mean, I think that there's the danger then that we always come in a kind of good bronze medal at the end, yeah, or even behind that. Whereas the danger of the other thing is the provincialism. One thing I'm glad about in this festival is I think that apart from some of the general speechifying on the first night, you know, patting ourselves on the back and telling ourselves how great we are, it hasn't really been about that. I mean, the simple fact is that there still isn't a single work with an Irish composer's name on it that is part of the international repertoire in music.
Not a single one?
Not that I know of. Name me one.
That's a good point.
Right? I mean, there isn't, so we got to deal with reality here. But on the other hand, you know, the people who say, well, where is the Irish Bartok or Sibelius? And while the answer to that question is at one level the obvious one, I do get a bit impatient with the question as well. It's almost as if some people say, I'm only going to sit down and eat if it's a 5-course meal with candelabra and the best of wine. Yeah? Masterpieces all the way. And to some extent, our concert life, the way it's structured, spoils us in this way, because it encourages us to think that way. It actually spoils our palate, because we don't explore the other things that are less familiar. And one of the joys of this festival has been that it has almost forced us to explore the less familiar and to say, well, actually, that's rather remarkable. And I didn't know this was happening. And oh, this composer was doing that and she was doing that. And that's part of the discovery of music, surely. I do think that if the world paid more attention to Irish composers, they would get a great surprise at the diversity and in many cases the quality of the music being written. In some ways, I think that the Irish, we've now got used to thinking ourselves as composers with a local voice that's also an international voice. What we still have to work on is pushing out there. If we compare ourselves with the Scandinavians, for example, which is a fairly comparable instance because it's a lot of countries about our size with our kind of population, the Scandinavians are amazing at promoting their composers. The library here gets trunkfuls of CDs. They distribute scores. Their composers and indeed their conductors are everywhere. But can I say that the Scandinavians have one advantage that we still lack? And that is that their major conductors and players actually take Scandinavian works with them to foreign performances. That's something that we frankly need to work on. It's still the accepted practice in this country for our major players to go elsewhere, and they take Chopin and Mozart and Brahms. And that in the long run is not going to do it for us.
So they need to start bringing the Irish Sibelius and Irish Bartok.
They need to start carrying the Irish in their knapsacks.